5 young men went to a basketball game. Only one car came back, abandoned 70 miles in the wrong direction, in perfect working order. 4 bodies discovered months later, 1 man never found. In 1978, California faced a mystery that defies every logical explanation.
And inside that mystery, there's another. Ted Weir survived for 8 to 13 weeks in a Forest Service trailer. He had heat, food, matches. He never used them. He starved to death wrapped in 8 sheets while a year's worth of supplies sat locked just 20 feet away. Someone was with him. Someone who vanished into the mountains.
And now, a hidden 2020 memo classifies this as murder. Suppressed for 5 years. The family say police just wanted it closed. You have a witness with 6 different stories. A confession in a church that was, never investigated what really happened to the boys from Yuba County.
Welcome to Whispers of Crime.
Today we're looking at the disappearance of Jack Madruga, Gary Mathias, Ted Weir, Bill Sterling, and Jackie Hewitt. They're often called the Yuba County Five, but we have a stack of source material here that really it just changes the whole story. It moves it away from this idea of an accident and toward something much darker, institutional failure, maybe even targeted violence.
That framing is absolutely essential. The first thing we have to do is get past the labels the media used back then. These were 5 adult men, close friends. Everyone called them the boys. They all knew each other through the Gateway Projects, which was a vocational center in Yuba City, and they played together on a basketball team, the Gateway Gators.
And we really need to spend a moment on who they were as individuals, right? Because this narrative that they were just helpless, that they wandered off, it's completely shattered when you look at their capabilities.
Absolutely. The functionality is key here. Let's start with Jack Madruga. He's 30 years old, the main driver. He was meticulous about his car, a '69 Mercury Montego. He was also an Army veteran, and crucially, he had a valid driver's license.
Okay, so a competent driver.
Right. Then you have Bill Sterling, who was 29. The sources paint him as more than just part of the group. He was an avid reader, and he had this almost encyclopedic knowledge of maps. His sense of direction was supposedly incredible.
That right there just stops the "they got lost" theory in its tracks.
Yeah.
If Bill Sterling is in that car, how do they end up 70 miles off course in the mountains?
Exactly. And then there's Jackie Hewitt. He was 24, often portrayed as the most impaired, but he was far from it. He could read, he could write, he had his own motorbike that he drove all over town. He didn't have a license for a car, but he absolutely knew how to drive one.
Okay.
Then Ted Weir, 32, the oldest, he worked as a janitor. And there's this one story that shows you how they acted in a crisis. He and Bill once found a man who'd overdosed on Valium, and they rushed him to the hospital, saved his life. So these are people who understand what an emergency is and how to act.
And what about the 5th man, Gary Mathias?
Gary Mathias, 25. He's different. He didn't have an intellectual disability. He lived with paranoid schizophrenia, which is why he got a medical discharge from the Army. But the key fact here is that for 2 years before they disappeared, he was medically stable. He was on his medications, Stelazine and Cogentin. He was social, a hard worker, and the other men really looked to him as a protector.
So if you put them all together, 2 Army vets, functional drivers, a map reader, people who know how to handle a crisis, the entire question has to change. It's not how did they get lost?
No, it's how could this group of capable men become so utterly overpowered or disoriented that 4 of them die from exposure and 1 just vanishes?
The tragedy has to be about something else. A failure of someone to protect them, or a targeted act.
Exactly. And that context is everything. When you look at the last night they were seen alive, February 24th, 1978. The plan was simple. Drive 50 miles north to Chico State to watch a basketball game. They were excited because the next day they had their own tournament. The prize was a trip to L.A. They left in just light coats, which makes sense for a quick trip on the valley floor.
Okay, so the last confirmed sighting is about 10:00 p.m. They're at a place called Bears Market in downtown Chico. The game's over. They're just getting snacks, chocolate milk, Hostess pies, candy, a completely normal end to a Friday night. And this is where the official story just breaks.
It shatters, because this is where we find the first piece of suppressed information. Sources from the area, local accounts, allege that there was a brawl, or at least a very significant, very forceful altercation at Bears Market that night. And this detail was, kept out of the official reports, out of the media narrative.
And that immediately makes you look at who was running the investigation. The sources point out that the lead investigator from Butte County, Lieutenant Ayers, was apparently a relative of the store's owner.
Yes.
So you have a potential conflict of interest right at the center of the last known location, tied to an explosive incident that was just buried. Was this the thing that made them run?
Something made them run. and with extreme urgency. Because instead of heading south on Highway 99 to get home, Jack Madruga drove the Montego east. He went up the Oroville-Quincy Highway, this rugged, isolated road that climbs 4,400 feet into the Plumas National Forest.
That's nearly 70 miles off course. For men who live there, with Bill Sterling, the human GPS in the car, that's not an accident. You'd know you were suddenly climbing a mountain in a snowstorm.
You would. Locals, experts, they all say that's an impossible mistake to make.
So they weren't lost. They were being compelled.
They were either following someone, being chased by someone, or running from whatever happened at that market.
The fear must have been powerful enough to override everything. Their common sense, their knowledge of the area, all of it.
Which brings us to where the car was found. It only confirms that they were not up there by accident.
Right.
So 4 days later, February 28th, the Montego is found near a place called Rogers Cow Camp. It's unlocked, it's sitting in shallow snow, and it's working. Law enforcement even noted the undercarriage had no damage, which shoots down any theory that they got stuck struggling up the road.
And the snacks they just bought are still inside. The keys are gone, but the car is fine. It has gas, it offers heat, shelter. We have to stop on this for a second. Why would 5 men in light jackets abandon a perfectly good, warm car on a forest road if all that was wrong was a little snow?
It suggests they fled the vehicle, not that the vehicle failed them. Leaving the car means the threat was immediate. It was right there.
The only person who supposedly saw anything that night was a man named Joseph Sconce, and he becomes the key witness for the whole misadventure theory.
Yeah, Suchans, he was 55. He claimed he'd driven up that road to check the snow line in his VW Beetle. He says his car got stuck, and while trying to free it, he had a mild heart attack, which doctors did confirm later. So he's in his car in pain sometime after midnight.
And his story is just,
Mm.
it's really strange.
It is. He told police he saw headlights come up behind him, a car that matched the Montego. He said he saw a group of men outside. And then he adds this bizarre detail that he might have seen a woman holding a baby with them.
A woman with a baby. Where did that come from?
Nobody knows. He says he yelled for help.
Huh.
And what happens next is the key. The headlights immediately go out. The men stop talking. Later, he says he saw flashlights, but when he yelled again, they vanished too.
But his account is full of holes, right? He told different stories.
They're wildly different stories. He even admitted at one point he might have been delirious from the pain of the heart attack, and people in the community described him as an unreliable storyteller.
So why? Why did the police lean so hard on his testimony? It feels like it was a convenient way to explain things.
It creates a neat narrative, doesn't it? The boys got lost, they were spooked by a sick old man, and they ran into the woods. It means you don't have to investigate the brawl at Bears Market. You don't have to figure out why they were up there in the first place.
But what if he was more than a witness? What if he was the threat?
Yeah. That's the other interpretation. Imagine Sean's, maybe he's armed, maybe he's aggressive, and he confronts them, forces them out of their car. Then he has his heart attack. He's in distress, but to them, he's their attacker. Of course they would run. Of course they would ignore his cries for help.
That makes so much more sense. It explains leaving a warm car for a freezing night. The danger was right there.
And that's where the case stayed. Frozen, literally and figuratively, until the spring thaw. On June 4th, 1978, 4 months later, the central paradox of this whole case is discovered. Motorcyclists find a U.S. Forest Service trailer near Daniel Zink Campground. It's 19.4 miles from the car. And inside, they found the emaciated body of Ted Wire.
He had been alive for a long time after they vanished.
A terrifyingly long time. Pathologists estimated he survived for 8 to 13 weeks. He'd lost between 80 and 100 pounds. The official cause of death was starvation and hypothermia.
But the scene? The scene itself makes no sense if they were just lost.
None at all. His body was found neatly wrapped in 8 sheets on a bunk. It suggests someone was caring for him. His feet were severely frostbitten, gangrenous even. He likely couldn't walk, which explains why he was still there.
But the paradox is just, it's staggering. He starves to death in a place filled with resources. There's a fireplace. There are matches. There are paperback books and furniture to burn. None of it used.
There was a butane tank for the trailer's heating system. It was full, untouched.
And the food. The locker full of food.
Yes. In a shed outside, a large locker filled with enough dehydrated food to feed 5 men for a year. That locker was never opened, which suggests either a profound fear of taking supplies, of getting in trouble, or that the person left with him was physically unable to break the lock.
But we know someone with survival skills was there.
We do. Forensic evidence proved it. They found 36 C-ration cans from a smaller shed had been opened and eaten. military rations, and they were opened with a P-38 can opener.
A little military tool.
The one only an Army vet from that era would know how to use. Jack Madruga died miles away. That single tool is the strongest proof we have that Gary Mathias, the other Army vet, was in that trailer, actively preparing food for himself and for Ted Wire.
So this wasn't confusion, this was structured survival.
Rational, structured survival for weeks.
So if Mathias is there, he's feeding his friend, why doesn't he light a fire? Why not break into that locker of food that could have saved them both?
The only thing that makes sense is fear. A fear of making noise, of drawing attention. A fear of whatever drove them up there in the first place.
There's also that watch, right? The one nobody recognized.
A gold watch with a missing crystal, found right next to Weir's wallet, which still had his cash in it. No family member ever claimed it. It didn't belong to any of the 5 men. Who left it? Why wasn't it pursued as a major lead?
It feels like someone else was there, or had been there.
The implication is that someone, presumably Gary Mathias, was caring for Ted Wire, keeping him clean, wrapping him in sheets to stay warm, feeding him what he could. And then at some point, that caregiver was either forced to leave or felt he had to.
Before we go on, this is probably a good time to remind everyone.
Don't forget to follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime. Like, share this episode with others who might have information about this case and help. Also, comment your suggestions below. Drop your positive review and rating.
So Ted Wire's discovery in June, it confirmed they didn't all die that first night.
Yeah.
But finding the others just made the timeline even more confusing.
It did. Just 2 days after they found Wire, searchers found Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling. They were 11.4 miles from the car on opposite sides of the road. Both died of hypothermia.
And there was that detail about Madruga's body with the watch.
Yes. He was found clutching his watch in his hand. Some researchers think that could mean he died during the day. Trying to use an analog watch as a crude compass requires sunlight. It suggests they weren't overcome in the dark on the first night. They were still moving, still trying.
And then Jackie Hewitt.
His father, Jack Hewitt Sr., found his remains. It was mostly just a spine and some clothing under a bush less than a mile from the trailer. Everyone said Jackie was Ted Wire's inseparable companion. So it makes sense he made it to the trailer with Ted and Gary. His cause of death was also hypothermia. But his shoes were missing.
Which brings us to the biggest missing piece of this whole puzzle, Gary Mathias.
Never found. The only physical trace of him after the car was his pair of tennis shoes left inside that Forest Service trailer.
And the theory is the shoe swap.
It's the most logical theory, frankly. His sturdier tennis shoes are in the trailer. Jackie Hewitt's shoes are gone. The thinking is that Mathias, in a clear, protective state of mind, swapped his better shoes for Wire's, which were sturdier, before he ventured out for help.
So he didn't just wander off in some psychotic break. He left with a plan.
Exactly. It's a calculated act of survival, which directly contradicts the idea he just got confused and died by accident.
But what about his schizophrenia? He was without his medication for weeks by this point.
That's the tragic part. He was stable on his meds, stelazine and cogentin, before they left. But the stress, the cold, the hunger. Without those meds, his mental clarity would have degraded rapidly. So even if he started out with a clear mind, by the time he left that trailer weeks later, he would have been in a very bad state.
If his instinct was to protect his friends, what could have possibly forced him to leave the only shelter they had? Especially if Ted was still alive.
Did the original threat come back? Were they found?
It's why that Brownsville sighting is so strange. It doesn't fit the timeline, but you can't just ignore it.
You can't. 2 days after they disappeared, a store owner and another woman in Brownsville, which is 30 miles from where the car was found, said they saw 4 of the men.
4 of them.
Yeah.
In a red pickup truck.
A red pickup. The witnesses specifically identified Wire and Hewitt, said they bought snacks and used a payphone. And the police report called this witness credible.
But that timeline makes no sense.
Yeah.
If they're healthy in Brownsville on the 26th, how do they end up dead in the mountains, miles away? Who's driving the truck?
And Jackie's brother said Jackie hated using the phone. The phone booth detail is highly suspect.
It feels like it has to be one of 2 things. Either the sighting is wrong, or they were intercepted by someone. Someone with a red truck.
It points to external intervention. They were either helped or, more likely, abducted and then abandoned.
And all of this, the strained survival, the missing man, the contradictions, it leads you right back to the authorities and how this was handled. or mishandled.
The families have been bitter for decades, and when you look at the procedural failures, you understand why.
The biggest one being the refusal of help.
The most critical failure, yes. In early March of '78, just weeks after they vanished, forest rangers offered snowmobiles and their expertise. This was the window. This is when Ted, Gary, and probably Jackie were still alive in that trailer.
And the sources say the rangers even told them about the trailer at the campground.
They did. They urged Butte County to check it, but law enforcement refused the help. They called off the search until the snow melted.
They turned a rescue mission into a recovery.
They did. And the investigation, once the bodies were found, was just as bad. The autopsies were shockingly inadequate, even for 1978. No x-rays for broken bones, no comprehensive toxicology, no histological studies. These were standard procedures.
So calling it hypothermia based on skeletal remains, that's not really a conclusive finding, is it?
Medically, it's inconclusive. You can't rule out injuries from a fight or drugs that might explain their confusion. It just looks like they wanted to close the case fast. Natural causes.
And then there's the accusation about the investigators themselves.
A very serious one. Sources allege that more than half the officers on that case in 1978 are now on the Brady list.
For our listeners, can you explain what that is?
The Brady list is a list kept by prosecutors of police officers with a history of misconduct. Lying, corruption, untrustworthiness. Having that many investigators from one case on that list, it implies a deep, systemic problem of unreliability in that department at that time. It makes you question everything they did or didn't do.
Which makes the evidence that was kept hidden until 2025 even more explosive.
Astonishing is the word. We're talking about internal police documents that confirm the family's worst fears, documents that were actively hidden from them. The biggest one is a memo from October 8th, 2020. It officially classifies the case. It reads, Gary Mathias is believed to be a victim of foul play. This case remains open as a missing person homicide case.
A homicide case. Law enforcement believes he was murdered.
They do, which means they have evidence. But the memo also explicitly said, it is in the best interest of all involved that this letter not be forwarded to the Mathias family.
Why? Why would you tell a family their son was murdered and then hide that fact from them for 5 years?
The only thing that makes sense is that they're hiding something else, the department's own failures, maybe,
Right.
or protecting someone. It smells like a calculated cover-up.
And there's more that came out in 2025, right? The 911 call.
Yes. A previously dismissed 911 call from that very night, February 24th, 1978. A woman in a cabin near the area reported hearing screaming and yelling, and she described the voices as sounding panicked, like someone was being hunted.
Hunted. That is not the sound of people who are lost. That is the sound of terror, of being pursued.
It's the sound of a violent confrontation, and that call was dismissed.
Unbelievable.
And finally, photos from the original investigation were released. They showed tire tracks from a second vehicle near the Montego. And these tracks did not belong to law enforcement or any search parties. Someone else, in another vehicle, was there, right where the men fled their car.
So you take all this new evidence, the homicide memo, the sounds of a hunt, a mystery vehicle, the accidental death theory is just, it's gone.
It's completely untenable. This was not an accident. It was an act of violence that was covered up.
So who did it? Who had the motive to force 5 men up a mountain in a storm?
The sources point to two main theories, both of which fit the new evidence.
The first one centers on that witness, Joseph Schoen's.
Right, the road rage, or Schoen's involvement theory. It says he wasn't a witness, he was the aggressor. Under this theory, Schoen's, maybe he's armed, has some kind of aggressive encounter with them. Maybe it started back near the market. He forces them at gunpoint up the mountain and then forces them out of their car and into the woods.
And that explains everything. Why they left a working car, why they ignored his cries for help, because he was the danger, and why his story kept changing to cover his tracks.
Exactly. The screams on the 911 call could be him confronting them. 3 men die on this forced march. Weisher and Mathias make it to the trailer, and later, when Mathias leaves for help, he's killed, which fits the homicide memo.
But the second theory, the town bully theory, that feels more personal, more chilling.
It's intensely personal. Family research has linked the disappearance to a local man, just referred to as the town bully. This person was apparently known for violence, for being an arsonist, a drug dealer, and he had a history of harassing Mathias, Wire, and Hewitt at their vocational center.
So this wasn't random, it was targeted.
It seems that way. This town bully was married to Gary Mathias' sister, Sharon, and they were going through a bitter divorce around that time. He had allegedly threatened to hurt her, and the theory is that this attack on the men was retaliatory violence aimed at Gary.
Wow.
And this theory has a dark, unverified piece of evidence attached to it, a supposed church confession in 1994. The story goes that the town bully, who had apparently become a pastor, confessed to killing 2 men in the Plumas National Forest 14 years earlier. Now, law enforcement never substantiated it, but the location, the timeline, it aligns almost perfectly with what happened to Madruga and Sterling.
And there was a history of this kind of violence in the area, wasn't there?
A clear pattern. Just 3 years before the men vanished, the Gateway Center itself was firebombed. The director, Donald Garrett, was murdered in that fire.
So this was a community where people with disabilities were already targets.
They were vulnerable individuals who may have been targeted by someone with a personal grudge or just by a predator who thought he'd get away with it. The conclusion is just devastating. 4 men died and 1 vanished because they were likely manipulated or forced to their deaths.
We started this with 5 young men gone after a basketball game. But we've established the official story is baseless. The evidence of survival, the decades of suppressed facts, it proves it. 4 bodies were found, but in ways that suggest terror and coercion. 1 man, Gary Mathias, is still missing, and officially he's a homicide victim.
The core conflict here is the official story versus the truth. The easy narrative of an accident versus the overwhelming evidence of foul play and a cover-up, the memo, the screams, the tire tracks. The families have always believed it, that these men were forced up that mountain and that institutional failure made a tragedy so much worse.
The case of the Yuba County Five is still open. It's an active homicide investigation for Gary Mathias. The full story has been deliberately hidden, but it is slowly coming out.
Don't forget to follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime. Like, share this episode with others who might have information about this case and help. Also, comment your suggestions below, drop your positive review and rating.
So the final question we want to leave you with is this. When the Yuba County Sheriff's Department wrote that memo in 2020, classifying Gary as a homicide victim and then ordered it hidden from his family, what was the one piece of information they were so afraid of revealing? Was it the killer's identity? Or was it the devastating details of their own failure, the one that let this happen and then buried it for decades?
If you have any information about the fight at Bears Market, the red pickup truck in Brownsville, or the identity of the person known as the town bully, this case is still open. These men deserve justice, and their families have waited long enough for answers.